It is May 14th, Monday, May 14th, and this is an interview with Sally Simmons for Dean Massaro's Preparing for the Lives in the Law Project. And this is our interview. My name is Elizabeth Townsend.
And say Sally.
Sally.
Because Sarah's my real name, but Sally's what I go by, and
Okay.
so I don't always
Very
understand
good. Okay, very good. I have
who
one
Sarah
of
is
those,
when
too.
you're talking to her.
I understand that. All right, very good. Well, welcome. I thought first we'd just talk a little bit about your background and sort of how you got to where you are right now in terms of what made you go to law school, and just a quick bio so we have a sort of sense of sort of who you are, and like were your parents lawyers? How did you decide to go to law school, and sort of where did you go after that? Just sort of.
And one of the graduation speakers talked about folks saying that they wanted to be a lawyer since they were 5 years old. I don't think it was quite 5 years old, but it was probably about 12. Because when I first seriously thought about what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I can't tell you why. I know that there's material from high school, when I was going in high school, when I said I was going to go to law school. And I frankly don't know what I would have done if I'd hated law school, or if I'd hated being a lawyer, because I don't remember having a serious career choice other than wanting to be a lawyer. I do remember talking to one of my father's lawyer. There are no lawyers in my family, as far as I know. But I remember talking to him, and he said I couldn't go to law school because girls didn't go to law school. And basically all that did was make me determined I was going to go to law school. Unfortunately, I had parents, particularly my father, who said, if that's what you want to do, that's what you should do. So I just decided I wanted to go to law school. I mean, I purposely majored in history when I was an undergraduate because I figured I could major in something I wanted to because I was going to law school, so I didn't have to be practical.
Did you have, in your early childhood, do you have any memories of like movies or, images of why? Is there anything that you think about why law?
I remember watching Perry Mason.
Mm-hmm.
I also remember my sister was in a car wreck. My older sister was in a car wreck. Would have been her sophomore year in college and my sophomore year in high school, and her deposition was taken for that car wreck. And I remember reading that deposition when I was 15 and getting most upset when they asked her questions that I thought were much too hard for my big sister to have to answer when she wasn't feeling well. But that's really, I couldn't tell you. It was just something that I always liked history. I liked the Constitution. I liked our system of law and justice, and it just appealed to me as something that I wanted to do.
And did your family, some families, they're more aware of the law issues, or was there anything like that going on in your family, or?
My dad was a geologist. My mom was a teacher. Daddy was the first person in his family ever to go to college, the second person who'd ever gone to high school. And I think perhaps there's part of him that might have wanted to go into law, but ended up in geology instead. And certainly he encouraged both my sister, he didn't encourage, he insisted that both my sister and I be able to support ourselves. He felt it very important that women be able to take care of themselves. And so early on, that was something that encouraged both of us to do something that was going to be both of service and otherwise. I think politics was another thing that he was very interested in, and so we always had the news on. We didn't have television, but we had the radio news. We read newspapers. We read magazines. We were encouraged to do that type of thinking. So that was in that type of reading.
And then the last bio, and then we'll get more into sort of now. You went to University of Denver for law. Did you go to the University of Denver?
I went my last year at the University of Denver.
Uh-huh.
I went my first 2 years here.
Oh.
Dean Ayers was my dean, and I had, at the time I was married, my husband had been overseas. He came back. He got transferred to Denver in the service, and right before my third year. And I was pregnant with our second son. So he said, we thought maybe it'd be nice if the four of us lived together as a family, and so I transferred. Juniors allowed me to transfer to Denver, and had told me I could get my degree from the University of Arizona. Denver said you can graduate from here if you want to, and at the time it was one of those fashionable things that one got your undergraduate degree from one place and your graduate degree from another place. So I elected, frankly to my sorrow, because I think the University of Arizona is a much better law school. So it'd been nice to have had my degree from here, but I didn't.
And just before we move on, what was it like to have kids, having little ones when you were in law school at a time when you were going through law school? Was it hard, or, I mean?
It made you more disciplined, I think. Jason, my older one, was 7 months old when I started law school. Justin was almost 6 months old when I started my third year of law school. And so I probably had less of a social life than some law students did. But I think it also made you more disciplined. I mean, you had to be. You got up, you got the kids off to school, you went to class, you came home, you took care of them, put them to bed, you went and studied. It's just kind of just what you had to do.
And then the last one is, what did you do once you graduated? Sort of, did you know what you wanted to do when you were in school, or did it take time to figure out where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do?
In terms of the type of practice I had, no. My husband was getting out of the service as I finished up law school. In fact, his last day in the service was the day I finished the Colorado bar exam. And he was going back to school. So I knew I was going to be the breadwinner. So frankly, I took the job as soon as I had one and practiced with a firm in Denver for almost a year, and then got the opportunity to come home to Tucson. By this time we had 4 sets of parents, 4 grandparents living in Tucson. And with a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, it seemed like a very smart move to come back and be with them. So I just have stayed in private practice the whole time. I kind of fell into the practice areas. I did real estate first, and was hired to do real estate when I came down here. And then I'd been here about a month, and the fellow that I shared a secretary with got served as a statutory agent with an employment lawsuit, and he did estates and trusts, so he brought it in to me and said, "Here, take care of this." And I learned how to do employment law. So I kind of fell into both practices.
And that's what you do now. Talk a little bit about what you do now, and then we'll get to some more.
I do primarily employment law and I can't say corporate law, but advice to corporations and nonprofits, representing employers in all phases of employment law, whether it's wage and hour matters, except for workers' comp and except for union matters. I've done some union work, but not extensively. But it can be wage and hour, it can be disabilities, it can be Title VII, it can be Family and Medical Leave Act issues, it can be anything in that gamut. Also represent quite a few small companies, and it's one of the reasons I like Tucson is because you don't have a lot of large companies. When you have small companies, they want a lawyer, they want advice, and they understand that I don't know tax law, they understand but they want somebody they can turn to for help. And so one of the most satisfying parts, I think, of practice is many of my clients I've had for 15 or 20 or 25 years, and watching some of them grow has just been immensely satisfactory. And then working with nonprofits, I've worked with Humane Society, I work with Child Parent Centers, which is Head Start agency. I've worked with Compass Healthcare, so I've had a wide variety of exposure to those types of issues where they may have, I wouldn't learn animal law if I didn't work with Humane Society. I wouldn't learn about child welfare, child care regulations if I didn't work with Head Start. I wouldn't know anything about drug and alcohol rehabilitation if I didn't work with Compass and with some private agencies. So part of what I like is the fact that I have to know, you have to learn so much. You can never, you're learning a lot about a lot of things. and you have to know the company as well as the substantive area in order to give them the right advice. So I do a lot of agency work, some litigation, some advice, a lot of preventive law, which I much prefer because it's nice to solve problems before they get to be big problems.
All right, I have a bunch of questions. First, so you said you wouldn't have known anything about animal law. When you get involved with other with nonprofits, like how did you do it? I mean, did you go to them? Did they come to you? And if you're interested in things like that, like do you somehow have to sort of figure, I mean, if someone's interested in those sorts of things, how do they get involved with it?
I got involved with the Humane Society because there was an actual employment case in which I represented their executive director, and then just started kind of doing the general representation. My employment practice, I think, by representing employers, by doing CLEs, by doing talking to groups such as the Society of Human Resource Managers. Folks will say, can I call you for a question? And assuming you give them good service and you follow up on their needs, and that's just kind of evolved into representing them on a more general basis. One of the things I think for young lawyers to get involved with early on is particularly the sections of the state bar and the local bar. I think I've been a member of the employment law section probably for 25 or 26 years, and that only gives you the substantive knowledge, but it gets you in touch with folks who may say, gee, I like the way that they, and when I mean get involved, volunteer for things, work hard for it, and folks are going to say if you did a good job on this, and probably they'll do a good job with the client if they've got a conflict, or if they've got something that they can't handle, or if they're in Yuma, say, and need a Tucson lawyer, they're going to remember the fact that you worked hard and that you did something and you produced.
So talk more about the being part of the sections of the local bar and the state bar, and what exactly do you do? I mean, and how does that work? I mean, if someone who's never ever been involved in it, what is it? What's the point? Yeah, what is the point of all of it?
The sections, and you've got sections for all sorts of substantive areas. You've also got the Trial Lawyers Association. You have solo practitioners. You have family law. You have specialization as well, and some of the sections are also in the same substantive areas as you may have specialization in. But there basically are folks who are going to exchange information about the substantive and procedural and practical aspects of particular practice they do. With the employment and labor law section, we have CLEs that are just excellent. Both at the State Bar Convention and then usually in the fall, they'll send out newsletters. And you basically get to know folks that practice in the same substantive area you do, with whom you can exchange ideas as well as get to know. The other thing I think that helps, frankly, is professionalism, because when you're working with a group on a constant basis, whether it's putting on a CLE, whether it's a socialization issue, you tend to get to know them as people, and if you're adversaries, then frankly that usually makes for a better experience for all concerned, because you're going to be much more likely to be a competent, zealous advocate without being a jerk.
What kind of time do you put in when you say you decide you want to sign up for something like this? I mean, and you're involved. I mean, you've been very involved. Are there levels of involvement?
Oh,
or?
Of course. And most, I have to say, a lot of my involvement came after my children were grown or growing. I didn't get involved in the state bar and the Pima County bar, and in a very big, large level until my sons were in high school. They were both in high school when I really started getting involved. So it was kind of like, okay, now they don't need quite as much driving around and quite as much shuffling. So what do we do? You're used to having a career as a mom and a career as a lawyer, and your mom career starts winding down, so you start picking up something else. But there are all the levels of involvement, and sometimes I've been too involved and had to back off and say I can't do it anymore. And I think that's something that folks need to find, is their balance and what suits them. I do think whatever it is that they're doing, they need to be involved. You can't just be the resume fillers don't do anybody any good. being active, being somebody who follows through and does actual work with the organization, whatever you decide to commit yourself to. I think that's more important than having a huge bunch of them on your resume.
And a lot of the interviews that we've done, there's always this sort of, it's almost a turning to the bars to sort of fix problems, that the sections or maybe a committee can get together, or there's always a sense of like the future of like if we can get the involvement there, that maybe they'll solve certain problems. Sort of like whether it's how technology is going to impact in something, or what should there be a 2-year program or more schooling, or all these sort of issues are sort of what the law school should look like. A lot of people seem to think that we should turn to the bars to sort of think about these problems, and I thought maybe, I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that, or if that's kind of too vague.
Certainly the bar associations are I guess I think about it, and I think we're all in this together. I was active in the bar when mandatory continuing legal education first came in, and I was very active in the bar when the professionalism course was first put in for not everybody, but for new graduates, and kind of a thinking that how do we make sure that we're continuing to get the best educated lawyers and the best educated, most professional lawyers. But I really think it has to be a partnership among everybody. And the Supreme Court certainly sets the rules, and they've got to set the tone, and they do set the tone. And they're ultimately the deciders of what rules are going to govern us as lawyers, and can certainly set a direction for us. The bar has obviously much more resources just by virtue of numbers than both law schools combined, and many of the law schools, probably the law schools of all the alumni from any school in the state. But the law schools also can be a partnership, and we can learn from them, and I mean, all of us were here once upon a time, and I think we can all work together to contribute ideas and to work together to form plans and policies and practical programs that make the law continue to be how we as American citizens live. Because I think that's one of the things we have to kind of keep in mind, is that ultimately that's what we are. Ultimately, as lawyers, we are the keepers of a very important way of life. We are the keepers of the Constitution. We're the keepers of the laws of our state and of our country. And that's a trust. And so we all have to kind of work towards that goal of how do we best keep that in trust and use it for the people for whom, it's not, we're the keepers of it, but it's not ours. It belongs to the whole nation and to everybody in there. And we've just been given the privilege of special training and special work that allows us to make it better. And we're all there to kind of, we always need to be looking for ways that we make sure that we're taking that trust and doing the best we can with it. So I really think it has to be a partnership.
And has it been?
Not always. Not always. I think that there are many times when perhaps we've detached from each other and we've put law school into this little capsule and said, okay, we all have to learn it. We've all got this background. Now let's go out and forget that we ever were there, or forget that there's anybody still there. And conversely, I think there's been times when the law schools have said, okay, our job is just to educate law students. And while you've always had adjunct professors, and you've always had some involvement with between town and gown, I think that's something that's gotten much better, and that a necessity for all of us probably needs to get much better, because we also can become so practical when we're practicing that we can forget what the theory is. I've always felt lucky because I had my first 2 years here, In my first 2 years here, they put a big, huge emphasis on the basics. And the University of Denver didn't. I mean, they expected me to learn all those basics. And then the time University of Arizona didn't have as large a practice program as it does now, and Denver did. So you had that kind of marriage. And I think we're getting that marriage more and more. I mean, I think you have more involvement among students, making sure students get some exposure to real lawyers out in the real world, and at the same time bringing the lawyers back in and saying, gee, golly, help us educate these folks who are going to be your colleagues in just a short 3 years.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Hold on. Okay, keepers of a way of life. Can you talk a little bit more about what you think that way of life is and what it is that we're keeping?
It kind of sounds hokey,
That's
but
okay.
we were founded with what I think is just still an amazing document, the Constitution, that sets up a way of government and a way of life, and that quickly had the 10 amendments we know as the Bill of Rights adopted. And it's a way of life that we take kind of for granted if we were born in this country. One of the most meaningful things to me is a couple times I've been to the citizenship ceremonies where folks become citizens in the United States. And those folks promise to do things and uphold the Constitution and to appreciate what we have in terms of rights of free speech and protection of all folks' rights, whether it's to a fair trial or whether it's to right to counsel or whether it's the right to assemble or any of those things, that we who were born in this country just assume that's what's going to happen. That isn't necessarily so. That may not necessarily be what happens if we aren't willing to assure as lawyers that we take that seriously, and that we uphold it. And that doesn't mean everyone's going to be a public interest lawyer, nor probably could we handle everybody being a public interest lawyer, but it means we're going to support those who are willing to, and we're also going to say within any case that we take, whether it's criminal or civil, we're going to uphold the law. We're going to look at the law. We may have different interpretations, and we may be fighting for our interpretation of the law, but we're going to be governed by what the law is, rather than try to skirt it, rather than try to go under it. And I think it also means, when in a courtroom we're going to act like this is a place of dignity and specialness. Whether she or he is somebody that you like or don't like, if she or he has that black robe on, they represent something, and they represent the fact that we are settling our arguments in a room rather than a battlefield. And that's worth preserving.
What about this notion, when it all costs? How does that,
I can't agree with it. I mean, when at all cost and ignoring the law seems to me to be betraying the trust. If you look at the Supreme Court rules, there's a preamble, and I can't recite it for you, but there's a preamble that talks, the govern lawyers, and it talks about our agreeing to uphold justice and our agreeing to abide by the law, and our agreeing to, yes, represent our clients, but within the bounds of the law. And it's something I probably should read once a year, at least. But that's what our charge is not when it all costs. Our charge is to do justice and to do right under the law. And if we don't do it under the law of the town, the world can expect anybody else to. If we're not willing to pay homage to the fact that this is a rule of law. So no, winning at all costs to me isn't what we're charged to do. And it isn't what, when we stand up there, I mean, everyone who passes the bar exam and gets through character and fitness and has gone through their 3 years of law school is going to go walk in front of the Supreme Court, and they're going to raise their right hand and they're going to take an oath. And that oath isn't going to say, I do solemnly swear or affirm to win at all cost. It's going to say, I do solemnly swear or affirm to support the Constitution and the laws of the state of Arizona and the United States of America. And that's what I promised. That isn't what I didn't promise to win at all costs.
Do you find the other people that you work with having the same viewpoint, or what do you do when you find someone who's trying to win at all costs? Does it alter how you behave?
I've been lucky. I mean, for the most part, I haven't had that. And I really don't think most lawyers do that. And certainly I wouldn't have practiced in the group that I've practiced in. I've practiced with just 2 firms here in Tucson. But they were folks who I respect and whom I felt were both ethical and professional. And I hope that I haven't had the test, so I can't tell you for sure, but I would hope that I would have had the courage if I found that that wasn't the way they behaved, that I would have left. But I haven't had that challenge. I've dealt with honorable men and women. And I think that's another advantage of the smaller, the substantive areas and the employment area. For the most part, folks are very honorable because, for no other reason than if you have somebody that you don't deal with professionally on one case, 6 months later you may be facing on another case and you don't dare not behave well. I think that's the same is true with some of the other sections. I know I have a good friend, Eileen Hollowell, who's now a bankruptcy judge, and she would tell me that was the same for the bankruptcy section. So I think that's at least we're still small enough here that works.
Another follow-up question. You talked about law school and as a capsule or sort of a space, as a particular space. What do you think we are doing here? What should we be doing here? I mean, should it be a mix of the practical and the theoretical, or more theory, or, I mean...
I don't think you can get around having the basics. I mean, you have to have the basics, and you have to know about it. Before we started talking, I was saying I didn't know what a mortgage was when I walked into this, law school. When I walked into the Franklin building, which was then the law school. My folks had always lived in rented houses, so I didn't know who was a mortgagor and who was a mortgagee. You've got to get that, and there was also one of the speakers again at graduation talked about how professors tell you over and over they're not teaching you the law, they're teaching you to think like lawyers. That's real true. You've got to learn to analyze and to think like lawyers, and so you've got to have all of that basics. I think the fact that the practice programs we've developed here are real exciting, because I think that's also something you need, is you need that ability to walk into a courtroom and not completely dissolve into a little puddle the first time you go. I remember I didn't know how to do a default judgment when I first got into law school. I didn't have any idea where I went to pick up the file or how I walked into the courthouse or anything like that. And I think the practice programs are much better in terms of teaching you that. And I think that also hones your thinking as a lawyer, which is very important. Today at lunch I ran into a fellow who just graduated on Saturday, and we were talking about his taking the bar exam and talking about the multi-state in particular, where you've spent 3 years of law school being told that there is no right answer. You need to be able to argue every point. You need to have your reasons for what you're thinking about, and that's just as important. And then you get this test which says A, B, C, or D. So I guess for at least a half a day, you better know the basics anyway. But the rest of it, I do think, is preparing you to think like a lawyer and act like a lawyer and listen like a lawyer. Because listening is part of the skills you have to bring.
And what is listening? How is listening for a lawyer different than a non-lawyer?
You're going to have to listen to what it is your client is saying and spot what issues they're really raising, and what can you do and what can't you do. There's some problems we can't solve. There's sometimes that we're almost a psychologist and a social worker and getting them in touch with the places where they can solve it. So you've got to learn to spot those issues and to think, and what else are they telling me? What aren't they telling me? Where do I go from here? What question do I need to ask to get to the heart of this matter?
There's a lot of people who say that to know how to do that, you to have skills to do that you need interdisciplinary study, that you need to have psychology classes and cultural classes that make you more aware of different cultures and things like that. And I was curious what you thought about that in terms of being able to deal with clients and listen to clients and see sort of what their needs are.
I don't think it's going to hurt at all, especially as we become more and more a multicultural nation, and recognize that there's not necessarily one right way, that there are many right ways to either to reach the same solution or to reach a right solution. It's certainly not going to hurt. Some of that you can probably get as exposure through practice. Some of it you can probably get as continuing legal education. Some of it certainly you want to get from law school itself. I mean, I think it would be interesting to know the experiences of those who've just completed the LLM in international relations and international studies here, international law, because they certainly, I sat with them at the 3L lunch with a table with them, and just watching folks from Taiwan and from Korea and from Russia and I think Peru, and watching all of their multicultural experiences with essentially in some ways the American system of law, and certainly in an American law school, was fascinating. So it's not going to, I don't know whether I answered the question, but it's not going to hurt.
No. All right, how about a fun question? We'll come back to the harder questions. What is your happiest moment in law? When you think about and it can be whatever.
That's my happiest moment in law. I know one happy moment that certainly was really early on in my career, and I've had several happy moments. And I could think of two that I want to talk about. One that early on in my career, when I, through volunteer lawyers, represented a man who was an illegal alien who was suing for custody of his son. And when he was reunited with that little boy, that was certainly, it took 2 years. I think we did this over the better part of 2 years. That was just heartwarming. Another time I for years have represented a small company that was started by two fellows almost in their garage, and has grown to be, it's a concrete decorative works type place. And I've represented them for many years, doing a lot of their employment law, particularly helping them with their policies and procedures, getting the way their practice is established, working with the woman who was basically their COO and their HR person, and the three of us just worked really well together for many, many years. That company was bought out by an international conglomerate, and kept the two owners kind of faded into the woodwork. They kept the two HR and COO. One of them is the president of this particular division, and the other one is a chief human resources officer. And about a year after this merger had happened, the three of us went and had lunch. And as we were having lunch, they were saying that they were the only division where this multi-divisioned international conglomerate had said, no, you can keep your policies and procedures, you can keep your practices, you can run your employees the way you have. It's obviously working so well that we're not going to interfere with it. And to think, and listening to these women talk about how the business was expanding and how well things were working, and and that the international conglomerate understood that what they had done worked for their employees and was running a smooth, mostly happy ship, just made me feel terrific, because I thought, we built this. The three of us built this. And I had a part in building this, and that felt really, really satisfying.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of let's just do a little more substance stuff on that. What do you think made that policy work? What was it about? You do a lot of employment stuff, and I imagine that there's all kinds of companies and ways they approach their employees.
And that was one of the clues. That was one of the keys, was that we didn't try to fit one size fits all. We didn't go. It's one of the reasons I think you still need lawyers rather than just the internet. We didn't go on the internet and plug this, take this from this policy and this from that policy. We knew what worked for them, and the two of them knew their business. By that time, I knew a lot about their business. I knew how they did things. I knew what their employees needed, and when we drafted things, we did it with the idea of what's going to work for this company. What benefits do our employees need? What absentee policies do they need? How much vacation should they get? What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to encourage longevity? Are we just, we're trying to encourage longevity, because we know that our business, and most businesses, if you've got folks who are working and working well, you want to encourage them to stay there, because it sure as heck takes a lot more money to train new employees. So we were really focusing on what were their business needs and how could we best serve those, recognizing, of course, that there were also certain rules that had to be followed. You can't have employees. You might have flex time, but you can't have employees deciding on their own to have flex time and not telling anybody, so that when the production line's ready to start up, you only got 3/4 of the crew there. So I think that's really what was important, and what made it work was that we worked together, and we talked and we listened, and I told them what their limits were with the law, but we worked also with the limits for them as a company.
Let's talk a little bit. So it kind of fits into that, the idea of preventive law, and sort of what your thoughts about that are. And you had mentioned that earlier.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As I said, I've had many clients for several years, and lots of times you'll get clients and they'll call when there's a crisis, and they've already done whatever it was that's going to be done. If it's terminated somebody and they've had a charge filed or a lawsuit's already been filed, and how do we take care of this? It's very, I kid them. I say, if I've done my job right, I'll hopefully work myself out of a job. But it's much more satisfying if folks get to trust you enough so that they're calling you before that person has to be terminated. That again, you can put in policies so that folks know what's expected of them, and these are communicated to the employees so they have some idea of, okay, these are the expectations, and as long as I live within these guidelines and do my work, I will be rewarded, and you follow through and you've got some consistency, and so that you can hopefully catch problems, head them off at the pass. And help work through things. There's sometimes when folks will call them, they'll be upset, and noticeably upset, and probably with good justification, but they haven't talked to this person for, they said this has been going on for 6 months. Well, have you talked to them before? No. Well, maybe let's back up a little bit and see if we can talk to them. So I'd much rather do that. I'd much rather, I guess, facilitate communication in some ways.
Okay, it's a little off topic, off this part, but it's sort of combining your, life as lawyer and life as employment lawyer. There's lots of issues that people constantly are talking about in these billable hours, long hours, giving up your life, it's hard to have families, all those sorts of things. And I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about you said something about career as mom, career as lawyer, and all of these issues go together, and I think this is a area that people have great anxiety of in law school, of what is expected of me and how much can I negotiate what I'm doing, and do I have to go to a certain kind of firm? Am I ruling out something if I want a family? All these things are it's almost like they become afraid that they're going to become slave labor or sort of dedicate their life. I mean, it's just all those things that you hear all the time. And I thought maybe you could talk about what your thoughts are on that. It's a kind of big
And it's changed some since I was here. Since I started out, primarily, well, we could start with the fact that there were all of 12 women in my class and only 9 into the first year. And I think 2 of us, 4 of us had children. I had the youngest, and some of them had older children. So, you've got to think of, you're not going to do everything perfectly, I guess is the thing. That my older son gave me a sign, probably one time I was probably when he was in high school, that said, "Nobody's perfect." And I kept that sign for a long time. Then handed it off to somebody else who apparently needed it at the time. And you're going to make mistakes. You're certainly going to make mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes in terms of this balance. And not all of us are going to have. I did not have full-time childcare for the first. Well, the boys were very young. Their father was in school, and so they only had to go to daycare half a day, and he could take care of them the rest of the day. So that was one very good thing. But you're going to be anxious, and you're going to have trouble juggling it all. And I think each person's just got to kind of find their own way in some ways. I do think too, is we have had more and more dual employed families. We've certainly had more options in terms of what children can do. I don't think there's any one right way. I mean, I think each person really kind of has to find their own way. What can they do? And I'm not answering it very satisfactorily, even to me, because it was in some ways. I mean, it was a whole different generation in lots of ways.
Yeah, let me ask you a bunch of questions. First, do you think employers are being more sensitive to these issues, or you just don't see much change at all?
Some are, some aren't. I think that there are greater numbers of employers who are being sensitive to these issues. I also think that the high expectations in some places of billable hours, they're higher than they certainly were when I started, by far, and that's, you're not going to be able to meet a billable hour expectation of 2,400 hours or 2,200 hours, maybe even of 2,000 hours, and feel as if you're doing justice to your family, probably too. Unless you've got a really supportive mate, and you've also got a very, you're extremely well organized, and that's probably all you're going to do for a while. I mean, as I said, that's all I did for a while, till the boys got to a certain age, or my sons got to a certain age. That's all I did for a while, was either with mom or I was working. In some ways it's harder, in some ways there are more options. And it's going to be interesting to see how we as a profession respond to the fact that folks we are demanding that they have some balance. Certainly I read the ABA's Law Practice Management book, or the ABA Journal, or Arizona's Bar, Arizona Attorney. Those have arguments that say, folks are demanding. American Lawyer, I think, maybe a couple months ago, did something, an article on how lawyers coming out of law school are saying, wait, we want some balance. We're not willing to do all of this, and so we may have to become more creative.
Do you think that billable hours is a negotiable thing if you have a family, whether you're male or female, that you can say, I reduce pay or is that just?
In some places it is. I mean, I think it's becoming more of an option. And I'm glad you said whether you're male or female, because hopefully we'll not talk about either one of them in another 10 or 15 years, but hopefully if we start talking about tracks, we'll talk about mommy track and daddy track just as equally. And I think males appreciate that too. I know that there are places where you can negotiate it, and there are places where you job share. I mean, the county attorney's office, I think, has done job sharing for years, and there certainly are other places that you can do that. So it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see it evolve. I hope we'll recognize as a profession that we could be losing our best and our brightest and our most committed if we aren't willing to be a little negotiable, a little flexible.
And then on a practical level, how were you able to do, I mean, once your husband was out of school, and then we'll get on to other things, but just because I know this is something that people get worried about, how did you do it? I mean, like a daily basis, take a typical day, how did you get it all done? I mean, you know?
I was younger. You don't have any personal time. You really don't. I mean, little things like they didn't have where they went to school, there was no cafeteria, so you made lunches on Sundays for the whole week. It was part of the reason that we had 4 grandparents. I only through my dad had died by then, but we had 3 grandparents. If the kids were sick, one of the 2 grandmothers took care of them. And I went out of town. I was divorced when the boys were 12 and 9, so when I went out of town, my mom would come stay. You make do.
Were you able to leave work early if they had things to do, and was that,
Most times I was. I worked at home a lot. I learned to work at home quite a bit. And on weekends I worked, but I almost always worked at home, so that I would at least be there. That even if I was sitting on the couch reading, while they were out playing, I could see them, and I could interrupt, and you worked at night. You did all of those types of things. And when they got to high school, I used a lot of my vacation time to follow them when they were in sports. I might take my vacation at 3 o'clock on Wednesdays for all the swimming season or all the soccer season. Both of their senior years in high school, I just said, that will be my vacation. I will just follow them wherever they are, and that will be my vacation, because I'm not going to see this again. So you just kind of juggle it.
And find creative ways.
Creative ways.
And did you find that your employers or the people that, I think the other thing is that I think people feel like, well, mostly women, which is regrettable, but that you're going to be penalized, that somehow you will be looked on as less because you aren't,
The folks used to have the argument about whether you should have pictures of your children in your office. I think I always have. I also learned to do things like I wouldn't tell. I would just say I had an appointment outside the office. And would also say that with clients. I figured the clients didn't know that I had to necessarily know that my appointment was at the soccer field. But I also want to tell a story that I think is really kind of made me feel good, made me knew I picked the right books to practice with. Is a fellow by the name of Russ Jones, who was my mentor. Russ graduated in 50 or 51. And I can remember Jason, my older son's senior year in high school, was his last swim meet of the year. And he swam breaststroke and relay, so he was at the very beginning and the very end of the swim meet. And Russ called and said he needed to set up a meeting with our best client, and could I meet at 5 o'clock that afternoon. And I said, Russ, could we make it maybe 5:15? How long do you think it's going to last? And he said, about half an hour. I said, okay, that'll be fine if you can make it 5:15. I said, I can make it from downtown to Amphi High School, see Jason swim in the breaststroke, come back, and then still get back in time for his relay. And Russ said, no, you're not. He said, we'll have this meeting tomorrow morning. This is your son's last swim meet. You go to that swim meet. We'll set this meeting for tomorrow morning. And that just made me feel like, after that, well, not after that, before that I would have too, but it was one more reason why, if he wanted me to walk off a top of a building, I would have walked off the top of the building just because he was that caring and that was that concerned, and I will always appreciate that.
That's a good story. Let's talk a little bit more. One of the things Dean Massar, there are two things I want to see. One I'll give you is you talked about your mentor, and what should a mentor be, and sort of if or what lawyers, I mean, what are good qualities in lawyers, or sort of those sorts of things, sort of models for young lawyers.
One, he was absolutely complete rock solid integrity. Just absolutely was just a bastion of, is still, because he's still practicing, a bastion of integrity. And I think it probably took me 5 years to ever get something that I'd submitted to him, as a draft back without red lines all over it, but I sure learned a lot from him, and I knew that he respected me, and he was willing to talk, and he was willing to explain to me. I also watched him. You never went into something without saying, and handed him something without him saying, did you shepherdize this? Did you look at the pocket part? I mean, I watched this man who helped write some of the laws in the corporation code turn around and read the statute book again himself before we answered a question. So it was just this thoroughness and this dedication, this integrity, and this ability to let me ask the dumb questions. Fortunately, I got told very early on by a mentor in Colorado, Sally, there are no dumb questions. The dumb questions are the ones that aren't asked. So I would get up my courage and go ahead and ask the dumb question. It was that. I mean, it was the willingness to listen, the willingness to set the example of being thorough and being diligent and being absolutely honest, and also knowing that he would back me up. If I made a mistake and he was supervising me, it was his mistake, and he might privately chastise me or teach me, but he was going to be up front, and he was going to be standing there, and he was never going to. I wasn't going to be sold out. I was going to be supported, and I was going to be taught. And just that kind of thing just inspires tremendous loyalty. So I feel fortunate. I have him, and I have another partner that I've practiced with now for almost 27 years, and he was another one that he was a year ahead of me in terms of when he came to the firm, that I could just go to and ask the dumb questions that I was afraid to ask the older partner about, like, where is a clerk's office? How do I go do this default judgment? Those types of early things. So I was lucky I had two wonderful male mentors.
Can I ask you I know we're running out of time, can I ask you just a couple more questions?
Sure.
And then we'll, okay. Have you had situations, we've had a lot of questions about sort of your personal philosophy or belief system and how you connect that with the law, and we've talked about that already in some ways in terms of sort of being a keeper of the law, and I thought maybe we just talk about it in other situations. If you have a client that you don't agree with sort of what they're doing, what do you do, and do you have those situations?
I have fired clients.
Yeah.
I have fired clients because I just didn't. I didn't agree with what they were doing and how they were doing it, and I just said, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I just can't, and I think we need to find you another lawyer.
And how do you, that seems, how do they change their tune, or do they just?
No, one of them, one client I can think of that he's someone who has certain beliefs in terms of tax payment. And I didn't agree with that. So we parted companies. It gets frankly easier the first time you're thinking, how am I ever going to have enough work, and where my partner's going to think of me if you're a young associate. But that was one of the things about having mentors. Both of those folks that I talked about, the men I talked about, were the kind that I could go to, and they would both say, no, you don't represent people with whom you have this basic disagreement. You just can't do it, because you can't put your heart into it. Mm-hmm. And it's not right anyway, so you just don't do it because it doesn't feel right.
Okay, and then the other one is about clients. this sort of goes with it. Difficult clients. How do you cope with a difficult client? And do you have like an example of like, do you?
I could think of being fired once by a client who, because I was a woman, he wanted a real lawyer to represent him in connection with this alienation of affection suit. He wanted a real lawyer, he didn't want a girl. So he was one difficult client that I had no trouble getting rid of. It was very good. I was glad he fired me. Sure, I mean, people are people, and you do have difficult clients. And I do remember having another fellow tell me that he was very glad when he started getting gray in his hair because it made clients believe him more. And I think there's something to be said for that. There's some advantage to wrinkles. And there were lots of times, frankly, when I did feel that clients weren't taking me as seriously, not because I was a woman, although I'm sure I know there was some of that, but also because I was young. What do you want this young whippersnapper doing, trying to tell me what to do? You have difficult clients throughout your legal practice, and part of what you try to remember is within, at least for me, what I try to remember is that within the bounds of doing things that are legal and that are ethical, and making sure that that's foremost, because that's really what you have to sell is your integrity, that they're the customer. That they're the ones who, they deserve the service. That's what they're paying for, and they deserve to get it. So, sure, there are difficult situations. There are times when you may part company, but I think trying to remember that's who you're serving is, at least for me, is important.
All right, here's another sort of fun or silly question: is what I don't know if it's even an answerable question. What do you think is one of your biggest surprises about what it is to be a lawyer from when you were 12 and were thinking about being a lawyer?
It's a heck of a lot less dramatic than you think of when you're 12. There is tedium in the law. Sometimes reading federal regulations to try to figure out what the...
So are you happy with your choice?
Definitely. When I was state bar president, I wrote a column that said if I had it to do all over again, I'd still be a lawyer. And I can't tell you all 10 reasons I listed then, but it's still one of those professions where you have to constantly learn, and you have to constantly grow, and there's new ways to do things, and there's new things to learn. And I think about it, and I think about 5 or 6 years ago, and having absolutely no idea how to get on the internet. Well, now certainly you do your research through Westlaw on the internet, so you're learning technical things as well as practical things or substantive things, and it's still a challenge. You still get the rewards of a client saying thank you. I'm happy. I'm glad I chose this. As I said, I don't know what else I would have chosen, but I'm glad I chose this as a profession.
And do you have any other thoughts or topics or ideas?
It's going to be an interesting, one of the changes we haven't really touched on is a proliferation of self-help. Well, I guess we did touch on it because you still can't, as I said, you can't get something off the internet and pull it from here and from there. It's going to be interesting to see how that changes in the next 15 or 20 or 25 years. And I still think that no matter how many lawyer jokes there are, and how many polls say X, Y, and Z, it's still an honorable profession, and that most folks who know lawyers, and I've heard different studies, but I still think most folks who know lawyers or who think of someone as their lawyer respect that person. So I certainly think there's still hope for us, and I'm sure there's a need for us, and And I think more and more of law students, at least what I've seen, think of themselves also as public servants. You know, see that there is a need to give back as well as to take. And if there's anything I want to make sure they take with them from law school, because I think it is inculcated in them here, is that notion that they are public servants as well as lawyers. Doesn't mean you can't make money, and there's certainly nothing wrong with us making a living, but I remember Dean Ayers standing in front of us at orientation and saying, if you expect to go in the law to become rich, better go next door or walk down the street, because you're not. You will be able to support your family and put food on the table, and in most cases, you know, roof over your head, clothes on your back. But if you're going into the law to become rich, then you shouldn't do it. If you're going to go into the law to be rewarded in a lot of intangibles, I think you will. I think you can have that, and you'll still have food on the table and clothes on your back and roof over your head and a car in the garage. And ultimately, what more can you want? So.
That's very nice. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Perfect. You're welcome.